Whoa, what is going on, football fans? Back at it with another New York Giants video. Got a lot to talk about today. The New York Giants made an acquisition. They had a visit. We'll talk about him. I don't know what's going to come from it, but it's been rumored for the last couple of days he was going to come in for a visit. Haven't heard much news after that, but we'll talk about Jon Robinson, who I think would be a really good pickup for this football team, and some bad news or good news, depending on how you want to look at it. Not only did the Giants lose Nick Gates, but now they lost Jon Feliciano to free agency to the 49ers, and that's where we're going to start. We'll pull up the quotes with that, but that's obviously going to leave a lot of New York Giants fans wondering, with a unit that was already very weak on the interior to begin with. I think we all agreed we needed an upgrade at that center spot, even if they brought either Gates or Feliciano back, and they have a lot of unknowns at the guard position. Where does that leave us going into the draft? Well, that will be a golden question going into the draft, but we'll touch on that first. Talk about that briefly. The news that came out about Jon Feliciano, this coming out from Kim Jones. Jon Feliciano tells Newsday he has a one-year deal with the 49ers. New York Giants lose a veteran on the offensive line and a great locker room guy. And last year, Feliciano was okay, mediocre, to put it nicely. I think he had a 58 PFF grade. Of course, a lot of people are going to remember the game that he cost us with the unnecessary roughness penalty, but he was okay. I'm not going to say he was abysmal. He was okay. But at the end of the day, I think we've had enough of okay as Giants fans. We want to see a young offensive line grow together. And I personally am not of the mindset of I want a stopgap. Now, of course, you can't force a draft pick. The Giants don't love a center in this year's draft in the first, second, third round. I get it. You got to continue to build other parts of this roster. But obviously now it's a huge question mark going into the offseason what they're going to do with that offensive line if they don't address it in the draft. Of course, they still could sign a veteran off of free agency. There's several guys out there that they could bring in as a stopgap option. And maybe that's the route that they go. But ultimately, they're going to need to find a young alternative at that position. Will it be this year? We'll wait and see. Would it shock me if they went center in the first round? No. Would it shock me if they went in the second round? No. As a matter of fact, I'm probably expecting it at this point in time. If you look at the Giants roster right now, the biggest needs, well, where did they lose two pieces? On the interior offensive line. And that was a huge need to begin with. We added a premier linebacker. We added at least some weapons in the passing game. So going into the draft, especially after the departure of Jon Feliciano, a guy that was at least familiar with the guys on this line, familiar with the blocking scheme, that's a tremendous need now going into the draft, along with, of course, the wide receiver position and the cornerback position. I still think I'm leaning that the Giants will go corner or wide receiver in the first round just based off the strengths of this draft and positional value. But as we get into day two, I certainly expect the New York Giants to address the interior offensive line. And we'll have to wait and see how they address that position. But hopefully the Giants finally get that situated. We know that's been a big problem all along. In terms of guys that are currently on the roster that could kind of fill that void, I would guess Bredesen. Bredesen was solid for the Giants at the guard spot, but he's not a natural center, right? You'd kind of be asking him to play out of position, much like we did with Nick Gates, much like we did with Feliciano, who transitioned to the center position last year for the New York Giants. It's possible you do that. Then you ask yourself, well, what do they do with the guards? Well, you're probably looking at Kowinski for another year, along with the Zudu, who you hope would further develop. But you got to think they're going to look to improve at least some depth on that offensive line in this year's draft. The question is, where are they going to invest those picks? Will it be day 3 picks? Will it be day 2 picks? Will it potentially be a day 1 pick? That all remains to be seen. But Jon Feliciano is on his way out, and you got to think the New York Giants are going to be looking for a center. We'll see what they do throughout the rest of free agency. Right now, the Giants don't have a lot of cap space. Now, of course, cap space could always be manipulated. You could look to extend Leonard Williams. You could look to extend Saquon Barkley. You could look to extend Adoree Jackson. You could look to extend Dexter Lawrence. And they have a lot of avenues where they could go to free up some cap space if they feel they need it to bring in another player, whether that be on the offensive line or the defensive line. And we're going to talk about him in a second, a guy that I'd be really excited about if the New York Giants were able to bring him in. But yeah, just wanted to talk about briefly about the, the departure of Jon Feliciano and some of the options they may have. I'm leaning they're probably going to go center day 2, hopefully round 2, no later than round 3, but we'll see how it all, approaches when we get to draft time. Next thing we're going to talk about is Jon Robinson, and this was kind of the news that a lot of Giants fans were excited about. We've been teased about this now for 2 or 3 days when we saw the initial text come out from Ian Rappaport, and that's what it was. Rams defensive lineman Jon Robinson, one of the top free agents available, is scheduled to visit the Giants on Monday, source said. The veteran could beef up the New York Giants defensive line that includes Leonard Williams and Dexter Lawrence, among others. And of course, the Giants also brought on Nacho on that defensive line, along with beefing up the linebacking core with Okereke. So if you were able to bring in another accomplished defensive lineman, and that is what he is, he's a former second-round pick. He's had a lot of bright spots since he's been in the NFL. He had a really good year with the Lions before he signed with the Rams. And if you remember that Super Bowl against the Cincinnati Bengals, he took over in that game. Many felt like he was the best player on the field that day. And he's certainly a run stuffer in every sense of the word. 330 pounds. That's exactly what the New York Giants would bring him in for. Now, why has he not signed on with anybody yet? Why is his market low? Because he's still relatively young. He's 27. I think he's going to be 28 at the start of next season. And he's still a good player by all accounts. You look at several articles written by the Rams. So many people credited him with why the Rams had as good of a run defense as they did after he signed there for that 2-year stretch in 2020 and 2021. And he was known as a really good run defender coming in. It's why he was drafted as early as he was back, I think, in like 2015 or 16 or whatever it was, out of Alabama. And he's had some ebbs and flows. He's had some ups and downs. And he's not a guy that's going to rush the passer, but he's certainly a guy that you could bring in here that could clog up the middle and help guard against the run, something that the New York Giants need to vastly improve on, right? You look at last year, the New York Giants ranked, they ranked, I think it was 28th against the run, in terms of, yards against per game, and they were 31st in terms of yards per carry against at 5.2. You bring in a guy like Jon Robinson along with Nacho and a huge improvement in that linebacking core. Suddenly, you're turning a weakness into probably a strength. And if you're a Giants fan and you watch those playoff games against the Philadelphia Eagles and you saw what they were able to do with their defensive line, wouldn't you want to mimic that and bring in good depth, be able to control the line of scrimmage? I think that's where Joe Schoen's head's at. And that would go a long way towards improving the roster in 2023. So we'll see how it all plays out. I didn't hear anything today on this front. We'll dive a little bit more into Jon Robinson. Robinson has had a quiet market coming off a torn meniscus, so that was the injury, writes NBC Sports Edge. Robinson was limited to 10 games last year before landing on the IR, but should be healthy for the start of the offseason. He should be part of a crowded defensive line part of a crowded defensive line with Leonard Williams and Dexter Lawrence if he signs with the Giants. Then this. In 2022, the Rams had the third highest run-stop win percentage in the NFL, according to ESPN Analytics, just like 2021. A big reason for that was the play of defensive tackle Jon Robinson. Prior to sustaining a season-ending torn meniscus against the Saints in Week 11, Robinson's 20 tackles for loss in 11 games. That's pretty good. Helped Los Angeles hold 7 of its first 10 opponents to under 100 rushing yards. So there you have it with Jon Robinson. Listen, I think it would be a tremendous pickup. I think it'd be a great pickup for this football team. That was arguably the biggest weakness going into the offseason. You could certainly argue linebacker, wide receiver, but the overall run defense last year was the Achilles heel of this defense. That's not to say we were great in coverage, and we still certainly need a lot of help at that cornerback position. And if we were to improve the cornerback spot, it would allow us to probably be a bit more aggressive in terms of against the run and not have to drop so many people back in coverage. So one thing is going to help the other. But if the Giants are able to improve this defensive line and do a better job against the run, it'll make the opposing offenses a lot more predictable on second and third down, which should lend itself to improving the secondary. One hand's going to help the other. So I would love this pickup for the Giants. It would certainly help in second and third and short situations. And that's something that we need to really improve on. I saw a lot of people on Twitter speculating if they were to bring in Jon Robinson, that, that means that we may lose Leonard Williams or we may cut Leonard Williams. I don't think that at all. He would be brought in to be a guy that would probably play 35, 40% of the snaps, maybe half the snaps, that would be a guy that stuffs the run. That would be his job on this team. And he would probably split time with Nacho, and they would have several sub packages. And yeah, maybe Leo and maybe Dex would get a few less snaps, but it would only be to keep them fresh so they could close out the games at the end of the game. We need more depth there. I think it would be a great pickup if the Giants were able to pick him up. Of course, everything needs to check out with the physical and everything else. He had a torn meniscus last year, and we don't know the timeline. And I'm sure the New York Giants tested him out today, and hopefully we receive word sooner than later of whether or not the New York Giants are able to sign him. But I'd be really happy if the New York Giants were able to land Jon Robinson. I think it would really make, like I said earlier, a weakness one of the strengths of this football team. Next thing we're going to talk about briefly is the small signing today. I don't know how much this is going to mean for the 2023 roster, and I don't think it has any impact as to what we're going to do in the draft. I saw people speculating on that on Twitter. I don't think that at all. I think this is a project player that maybe the New York Giants feel they could turn into something. The Giants are signing former Duke football cornerback Leonard Johnson to a 3-year contract per league source. He's healthy again. Johnson impressed the Giants during a workout today and now is being signed by Joe Schoen and coached by Brian Daboll and Wink Martindale. Now, a lot of people saw the 3-year deal. They went crazy. From what I heard, it's like, I think it's $1.2 million a year on average. I don't even know how much is guaranteed, but he's a guy that's going to come in and probably be a depth player in the secondary. I don't expect, Leonard Johnson to be a starter for the New York Giants. I just don't. I think he's going to come in as a depth player and a guy that maybe they feel long-term, maybe they could grow into something, or at a bare minimum, maybe he could help contribute on special teams. He does fit the scheme, right? By all accounts, he's tall. His arms are long. We'll get into some of the measurements, and he's known as a man press cover corner. He's got pretty solid speed as well when we pull up some of these stats. So, whatever. I mean, he's a guy I guess you want to keep your eye on. I'm sure he'll probably compete for a roster spot. And obviously the fact that the New York Giants landed him a 3-year contract leads you to believe that they feel there's a good chance he's going to make the roster to start the year. These were his measurements while at Duke on his pro day. He got hurt while, I think, trying to train for the combine. I think I heard that. But this is what he measured in at. 225 bench press reps. He had 12. He had a vertical jump of 33, broad jump of 10.5. Nothing that really jumps off the page. The 20-yard shuttle was 4.15, a 3-cone drill of 6.65. The 40 time range was at 4.50. He does have the good measurements from a height and weight standpoint for a corner, though. Just over 6 feet tall, 194 pounds. His arms are actually a little short. I was wrong about that. I think I said earlier in the video, it's 31 1/8. But he's a guy that's tall, right? Good weight to him. They probably feel maybe a guy that they could develop into a long-term answer, or at least potentially develop into a long-term answer at that position at a very affordable price. So he kind of mixes with the younger corners in this secondary, like a Cordell Flott, like an Aaron Robinson, and we'll see how they further develop these guys along the way. But the Giants make a small signing there. Jon Robinson comes in for a visit. And probably most importantly today, even though it may be bad news, Jon Feliciano signs on with the San Francisco 49ers. And now it leaves us thinking as Giants fans, what's the plan there? If you ask me what I want a center. And I want a center early in this year's draft. We'll have to wait and see, though, how Joe Schoen feels about the prospects. I'm excited to learn more about the prospects along the way. Some people feel like it's a relatively deep center class, but not a lot of guys that they feel should go in the first round. That's kind of the overall thought process by most people at the center position in this year's draft. But I got to think there's going to be at least 3 or 4 centers from everything that I've read that most people feel will be worthy of taking with that 57th overall selection. But it all comes down to how Joe Schoen feels about the prospects and how he feels about some of the free agents that are still out there, whether or not he feels Bredesen could step in and play the center spot for a year. We'll have to wait and see. But regardless, I think what was already perceived to be a need by Giants fans at that center spot, this only really, hammers home the fact that we need to address that position sooner than later in the draft. As always, guys, if you liked what you watched, please subscribe, drop a comment, maybe give me a little thumbs up. Cheers.